Hello, it's your friend Phil, project management trainer and coach. Today, we're going to take a look at four of the frameworks that are important for your PMP exam. This is an excerpt from the course, Project Management Masterclass. You can get into the class at projectmanagementmasterclass.com. Now, there are many moving parts for this exam, and many parts in the world of Agile and in the world of predictive project management, especially. Your exam is broken out into people, process, business, 42, 50, and 8. But when I talk to students, a lot of them still have trouble wrapping their mind around the entire gamut for the exam. So, first of all, we're going to talk about the overarching idea that you should have. And I call this the high level view of outline tasks. So, every project, no matter where you are, is going to be on a continuum. It's either going to be very predictive or maybe somewhere in the middle as a blend, somewhere more to the left, somewhere more to the right, or far to the right in the world of Agile. For your exam, you need to understand that there is not a good or bad approach, but there is a hybridized approach that is unique to every project. If you take a look at the Stacy complexity model, you realize that all the way to the left is simple projects. All the way to the left are projects that are close to agreement in terms of requirements and close to certainty in terms of technical approach. When you look all the way to the left, anarchy zone, experimental zone, that's where we're talking about agile. But your exam is going to present a hybridized approach in many of the questions. You could either be part agile, part predictive, either in terms of sequence or in terms of portions of agile and portions of predictive, or you could inject a little bit of predictive into an agile project or a little bit of agile into a predictive project. For that reason, you need to have a wider view of the world that is hybridized. And this is the model I espouse. I put this together based on the outline for the PMP exam. So every project should have a vision, a business case, a charter, a place where you plan, then you execute, then you inspect and check. In the world of Agile, or in the world of those specific methods we use within Agile, such as Kanban or Scrum, we may have names for these things, such as daily stand ups, such as the daily Scrum, constant check in that we do, whatever you want to call it. There is an inspect and adapt step. And then there's a replan and refine step. We do a backlog grooming or backlog refinement, as we would call it. We do those things. We demo and we deliver. And then there's a retrospective. So that's the overarching idea of what happens on any project, be in the world of Agile, predictive, or hybrid. There's always going to be vision, charter, plan, execute, inspect, check, replan, refine, demo, deliver, retrospect. Regardless where you do it, it does need to happen. So the first framework I want you to keep in mind is what I call the high level view of outline tasks. And this enables you see every project goes through this, whether it's predictive or agile. It's a good way of you wrapping your mind around the sequence of things. Now, going specifically into what you know as the notorious page 25, there is a framework from here. And that framework, I call it the pmbok guide mainline. It espouses the 80-20 rule, where 80% of your revenues come from 20% of your clients. In this case, 80% of your payoff to understanding the pmbok guide comes from 20% of the course, 20% of what you're seeing on the screen. So if you miss the boat on these, you've missed the boat. My advice is to understand the main line and the 11 processes that I talk about. So we have develop project charter that gives you the charter, identify stakeholders, and we have this interaction between develop project charter and develop project management plan, which gives you a project management plan that goes to direct and manage project work and goes to monitor and control project work. And in all honesty, it goes everywhere except two processes. The only two processes that the project management plan does not go to are the project charter being developed and the project management plan itself being developed. And that saves you a lot of cramming and memorization. Moving a step further, if you remember that the project management plan goes everywhere, then you're already a step ahead. And everything on the screen right now should make sense to you if you know the project charter is used in identify stakeholders, and the project charter is used in developing the project management plan, and the project management plan is used everywhere except two processes. Now, The project management plan goes to direct and manage project work, where we get work performance data and we get deliverables. And these two, they go to control quality. And you're going to see why I'm stressing control quality. Control quality is the hub where everything gets checked or should get checked before it proceeds along the main line. So you have your deliverables. And when I say everything, that's what you're producing, right? Control quality will give you work performance information, just like any other monitoring and controlling process outside of integration. That will go to monitor and control project work. And then from control quality, we have this very important association. You see verified deliverables coming out of control quality. You see deliverables going into control quality. Verified deliverables going into validate scope. That is a very important interaction. That's where the customer inspects the verified deliverable for themselves. And if they accept the deliverable, then you get an accepted deliverable. And honestly, these three are so important for your journey to understand what does PMI mean by a deliverable, a verified deliverable, and an accepted deliverable. We're ultimately going to get a final product, service, or result transition to the customer. We're also going to get a final report. And along the way, we're going to get work performance information going into monitor and control project work from all of these non-integration monitoring and controlling processes. That's another one to look out for. Still in this framework, we have work performance reports go into a number of places, including perform integrated change control, because if the work performance report is not favorable, we don't want to approve those change requests. And speaking of those change requests, they all go into perform integrated change control. To round this up, let's take a look at WPD coming from direct and managed project work and going into all non-integration monitoring and controlling processes. So you can see we only have 11 processes on the screen. However, the level of interactivity, the level of exchange is high. And this is one of the frameworks that you need to know for your exam, in addition to the overarching framework that I just showed you. So this framework is very specific to predictive project management, plan-driven project management. There is, however, another framework that you need to be aware of, and I'm going to use for the world of Agile what 70% of firms who say they are Agile use. It's the Scrum overview. Let's take a look at the Scrum overview. So let's one by one examine the components of the Scrum framework. Scrum is a lightweight framework that helps people, teams, and organizations generate value through adaptive solutions for complex problems. Think about it. If the business wants something, the business is going to request it, and it's going to go through a product owner to get into a product backlog. Now, if you haven't read the basics of Scrum, I would advise you to do that, because there are three roles in Scrum you need to know about: the product owner, the Scrum master, and the team. And the first role, the product owner, is a mouthpiece for the business. Think about the product owner like this: the product owner is accountable for maximizing the value of the product. In fact, we call this person the chief value officer. The product owner is also accountable for effective product backlog management. So right off the bat, we have a product backlog, which is a list of user-centered requirements. Think about it like that. The product backlog is where what the user wants, what the customer wants, is going to live. And be aware that this product backlog is managed by the product owner. The product owner is involved in creating and clearly communicating these backlog items for the team to work on. Now, speaking of the team, let's just go ahead and define all the roles. In the world of Scrum, there are three roles, five ceremonies, and three artifacts. The roles are product owner, Scrum master, and team. We're going to take a look at the ceremonies and the artifacts now. So the first ceremony is here in orange at the bottom of the screen, and this is sprint planning. So let's examine what exactly Ken and Jeff, the co-creators of Scrum, say about this sprint planning. Sprint planning initiates the sprint by laying out the work to be performed for the sprint. The resulting plan is created by the collaborative work of the entire Scrum team. The product owner ensures that attendees are prepared to discuss the most important backlog items and how they map into the product goal. So think about it like this. We have our first artifact called a product backlog. We have our first ceremony called the sprint planning ceremony. And next, we're moving into our second artifact. The next artifact is called a sprint backlog. Now, the sprint backlog is a subset of the product backlog because once the team has planned what to do within the sprint, then it gets logged into the sprint backlog. Again, Ken and Jeff say the sprint backlog is composed of the sprint goal, the why, the set of product backlog items selected for the sprint, the what, as well as an actionable plan for delivering the increment, the how. So this is your next ceremony. After the sprint backlog, we have our next ceremony, which is known as the sprint itself. Now, if you read the Scrum Guide, you realize that the duration given for this sprint is less than I beg your pardon, less than 4 weeks, 4 weeks or less. Now, there are a lot of firms that get work done a lot quicker than 4 weeks. We could say 1 to 4 weeks. But after the sprint, the next ceremony is the daily scrum. Call it the daily scrum ceremony. Again, reading from the high level definition that we have here in the Scrum Guide, the daily scrum. The purpose of the daily scrum is to inspect progress towards a sprint goal and adapt the sprint goal, the sprint backlog as necessary, adjusting the upcoming planned work. So we've seen 3 of the ceremonies so far. We have one ceremony that is not accounted for as a formal ceremony, and it's this one down here that we're about to see. This is known as backlog refinement. Backlog refinement does happen. It's alluded to in the Scrum Guide. Backlog refinement is where the backlog is primed, where the backlog is prioritized and gotten ready. And backlog refinement does not necessarily need to be an event that happens one time. It could happen at any point along the timeline. So it's not regarded as a specific ceremony, but it is something that needs to be done. And the product owner, again, is responsible for this. The next artifact is the potentially shippable increment, the PSI. The potentially shippable increment is what the team derives at the end of all that work within the sprint. Again, the PSI is an artifact, and we look at that as the third artifact. So the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the PSI, those are the artifacts. The ceremonies, sprint planning, daily scrum, the sprint itself, and we have a couple more that we're going to look at. There should be a sprint review ceremony where the customer and the product owner and stakeholders that are deemed important should be aware of and attend, because that is where the potentially shippable increment will be demoed. And last but not least, we have a retrospective. And in the retrospective, this is where the team, in secrecy and privacy, retrospects, takes a look at what went well, what didn't go so well, and they adjust and decide how to do things better. This is the next framework that I would recommend for your PMP exam. So far, we've taken a look at 3 frameworks. For those of you just come in, we're taking a look at 4 overarching frameworks that I highly recommend for your exam. The first one we looked at was the overarching framework, the high-level view of outline tasks. This is not in the pmbok guide. This is something I put together. The second one that we looked at was the pmbok guide mainline. Third one we looked at is a Scrum overview. And the fourth one we are going to look at is based solely on the PMP exam content outline. The PMP exam content outline, if you've not read it, is the book on which the exam blueprint is founded. In fact, it is the blueprint for the exam. So if you are at a loss for how to study, what to study, you need to be in a course similar to Project Management Masterclass, where we go over every single task in every single domain in a lot of depth from both an agile perspective, a hybrid perspective, and a predictive perspective. And that is exactly what my buddy Roy and I do in this course. We bring the worlds together to discuss not only the world of predictive, but we go into heavy agile think, heavy predictive think, and we guide you to where the content is. For example, if we're talking about any particular area, not only do we look at a high level view, for example, if we're talking about lead a team, we are going into the details of lead a team in the world of agile in depth. And then we're going to take a look at other important topics. For example, from the Agile Practice Guide, tenets of servant leadership, for example, and areas in your pmbok guide, the specific areas in the processes, and the specific inputs or outputs as we see fit. So we get very, very heavy into the content. It's a very deep and detailed course. One of the things we do is break down the content outline into an overarching framework for each domain. And we sequence this in logical order. The way the PMP exam content outline is presented is not in logical order. The logical order for the content outline has been re-engineered by us for the people domain. This is one of the three pieces of the final framework I am presenting to you. So this final framework starts off with the people domain. The first thing you do is actually not task one, it should be task six. You build a team. After you build a team, you define team ground rules. And of course, there's overlap in building a team and defining ground rules. But it's definitely not task one that is listed, which is manage conflict. No, you got to have a team first before you manage conflict. Otherwise, how is that possible? Build a team, define team ground rules, then lead a team, build shared understanding of whatever is at play, ensure team members and stakeholders are adequately trained. Task 13, mentor relevant stakeholders, empower team members and stakeholders, and then manage conflict. By the time you think about this, major things that need to be in the infrastructure for the team are already there. You've got ground rules. They know what they don't know. They've got a shared understanding. They are adequately trained. And by the time you get to manage conflict, there's a lot in place to help you do that. Engage and support virtual teams, collaborate with stakeholders, address and remove impediments, obstacles, and blockers for the team, support team performance, promote team performance through the application of EI, and negotiate project agreements. Now, my friends, these are all things that have been rearranged. If you look at the actual content outline, these are not in logical order. So that is the people domain in logical order, and it's one of the frameworks I espouse that people remember for this exam. Moving a step further and going into the process domain, again, there is a need to understand how the process domain is in a more logical order. For that reason, I have rearranged the entire spectrum in the process domain to give a table such as this. And in this table, we have an arrangement of the tasks, again, in logical order. First thing you want to do is determine the appropriate project methodology, the methods, and the practices. This is contingent on what we call the continuum of life cycles. Based on the continuum of life cycles presented to you in the Agile Practice Guide, you can decide if your project is high frequency of delivery and low degree of change, then you need to be in the incremental column. If you're thinking about a high frequency of delivery and a high frequency of change, a high degree of change, then you need to be in agile. If you're thinking of high degree of change, low frequency of delivery, that's iterative. If you're thinking of low degree of change, low frequency of delivery, you need to be in predictive. And again, you need to put on your thinking cap, take a look at the Stacy complexity model and determine what exactly should we use to effectively manage the work? How should we deliver the work to our client? Question for you. In forecasting time and scope, we want the cone of uncertainty to be what? Hit the pause button if you need additional time. 3, 2, and 1. In forecasting time and scope, we want the cone of uncertainty to be as small as possible. The smaller and tighter it is, the less likely you are going to go out of that band of possibilities. So when you make your estimates, you don't want it to be minus 75 to plus 25. No, you want it to be as narrow as possible. All right, let's jump back into our discussion about the process domain. Going back to our sub-framework for the process domain, you need to be aware of the logical order of occurrence. And the first thing is determine appropriate project methodology, methods, and practices. And it's here we talk about practices such as what I just showed you, estimating, budgeting, stakeholder engagement, and stuff like that. Next, establish project governance structure. Integrate project planning activities. Plan and manage project or phase closure or transitions. Plan and manage scope. Plan and manage schedule. Plan and manage budget and resources. Plan and manage quality of products or deliverables. Assess and manage risks. Plan and manage procurement. Execute the project with the urgency required to deliver business value. Now, you see that in this one, we have deliberately put task 1 all the way down here. Why? Because you cannot execute a project with urgency without having an integrated plan, without going through the planning of the most relevant knowledge areas: scope, schedule, cost, quality, risks, procurements. And now you can begin to think of executing the project with urgency required to deliver business value. Note that task 17 is all about planning phase closures or transitions. You need to plan that first before you execute. So the logic is as much planning as needs to be done before you execute your project with urgency. That's why task 1 is all the way down there. Ensure project knowledge transfer for project continuity, manage project issues, manage project changes, manage project artifacts, manage communications, and ultimately, you've got to engage stakeholders. Now, that's not to say it happens in strict rotation like this, but there are things that you immediately begin to do earlier on, and managed stakeholder engagement comes in executing. So you see the language in a lot of these titles for the tasks could be misleading. One thing I want to tell you right off the bat, my friends, is don't be moved by language that says manage, because that is an umbrella term for project communications management. This is an umbrella term for project stakeholder management. This is an umbrella term for perform integrated change control. This is an umbrella term for a number of things, including direct to manage project work. This is code for project procurement management, code for project risk management, code for project quality management, code for cost management, code for schedule management, code for scope management, code for close project or phase, code for project integration management, code for a lot of chapter 2, and code for a lot that's in the Agile Practice Guide from pages 14 all the way to 19. And of course, code for what I just showed you in the world of Agile, if you're looking at Scrum, or if you're looking at the world of predictive, talk about managed project knowledge, talk about performing great change control. So there's a lot of thought that needs to be put into understanding this. You need to be able to trace these back to Agile principles. You also need to trace this back to places in the Agile Practice Guide specifically. You also need to trace this back to the pmbok guide. I want to encourage you that as you take a look at each task, endeavor to tie it back to an Agile practice, tie it back to an Agile principle, and an Agile value in the Agile Manifesto as much as you can. These are things that are going to help you as you study for your exam. Okay? Let's go to our final one. The final one in this trilogy of framework under the content outline is in the business domain. Now, in the business domain, there has been no need to re-engineer the sequence of events. We left it as is. Let's review what happens in the business domain. First thing we have here is plan and manage project compliance. The second thing we have here is evaluate and deliver project benefits and value. Third thing we have here is evaluate and address external business environment changes for impact on scope. And last but not least, support organizational change. Now, these are so overarching and high level that there's no need for us to go into every single one and re-engineer the order. It could happen right at the beginning that you're planning and managing project compliance. It could happen right from the beginning that you're evaluating and delivering project benefits and value. So if I was going to make a switch between 1 and 2, my preference would be 2, but that's okay. The third one, evaluate and address external business environment changes for impact on scope, goes without saying. That should be happening all throughout the project. And support organizational change is really what the project should be about at a high level. So no need to change this by much. In summary, my friends, Project Management Masterclass is behind this training. If you need help, go on down there to projectmanagementmasterclass.com. The first framework we talked about is a high-level view of outline tasks. The second framework that we talked about is what I call the pmbok Guide mainline, which takes page 25 and extracts roughly 20% of it, puts it together in this mainline. You'll find videos that are put out about the mainline all throughout. This could also be a rapid means for those of you who are getting certified to continue thinking about the pmbok Guide after certification, but not in this huge, huge table. Instead, whittle it down to the 20% that gives you an 80% payoff. We also talked about the Scrum overview. That was the next framework we talked about, the 353 of Scrum. The last framework we talked about was a potpourri of what is in the PMP exam content outline. We took a look at the people domain in logical order. We took a look at the process domain in logical order. And we also took a look at this table that I presented to you in the very beginning. And last but not least, we talked about the business domain. Again, in logical order for the most part. I would make a switch between 1 and 2, but that's it. If you're getting ready for your exam, my friends, and you're in a bottleneck, I would advise you to let us help you. Roy and I help students all around the world. Wherever you are, you can always join the PMP Exam Masterclass going down to projectmanagementmasterclass.com. We have training starting up in the next month, the coming month. And if you really want to get this down pat, you'll be smart to join us. You take care. All the very best.